Dawn breaks low and gray over northern France. May 1940. The air is wet with mist, and the ground is dark with churned soil and crushed grass. German infantry advance cautiously, boots sinking into mud softened by spring rain. They expect scattered resistance. Rear guards, broken units, men already retreating toward the coast. Then the firing begins. Sharp cracks, fast, rhythmic, relentless. Not the slow, spaced shots of a few rifles. Not the irregular bursts of panic. This is controlled, dense, overlapping. Bullets tear through hedgerows and snap into tree trunks. Dirt kicks up in tight, walking lines. German soldiers drop instinctively, pressing their faces into the earth. Officers shout for reports. Machine guns are expected, perhaps several, maybe an entire British company dug in ahead. The fire does not pause. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The sound fills the field, steel bolts cycling, rounds striking, men shouting warnings that are already too late. German estimates climb by the minute. A platoon? No. More. Far more. But beyond the hedgerow, there is no company. No machine gun nest. No mass formation. Only a handful of British infantrymen, calm under pressure, working their rifles with practiced precision, each man armed with a weapon whose speed would reshape enemy perception before the day is over. A rifle the Germans did not fully understand. The Lee-Enfield rifle. In September 1939, Europe crossed a line it could not step back from. Germany invaded Poland, and within days Britain and France declared war. What followed was not immediate chaos, but a long, deceptive stillness. Armies mobilized. Borders hardened. Newspapers spoke of resolve. Soldiers waited. By the winter of 1939 to 1940, the Western Front had settled into what journalists would later call the phony war. Along the Franco-German border, little moved. Trenches were dug, then improved. Patrols went out, then returned. Commanders on both sides studied maps and assumptions inherited from the last war. Britain's contribution to this front was the British Expeditionary Force. By early 1940, nearly 400,000 British troops had crossed the Channel into France. They were positioned primarily in northern France and Belgium, tasked with supporting French forces if Germany attacked through the Low Countries. On paper, the British Army looked modest. It was smaller than its German counterpart. It lacked the massed armored formations that would soon define the war. Its doctrine emphasized discipline, controlled fire, and cooperation with allies rather than rapid, independent offensives. German planners noticed this. Within the German High Command, British infantry were often seen as methodical but limited professional soldiers, yes, but tied to old ideas. Intelligence assessments focused on British shortages, fewer tanks, fewer heavy weapons, a reliance on allies. The assumption was clear. If Britain fought, it would fight defensively and slowly. That assumption would soon collide with reality. When Germany finally moved west in May 1940, it did not do so cautiously. The invasion of the Low Countries in France was rapid, violent, and deeply coordinated. Armored spearheads cut through the Ardennes. Air power isolated roads and bridges. Infantry divisions followed fast, exploiting gaps before defenders could reorganize. British units were suddenly pulled out of their prepared positions and thrown into fluid combat. Instead of fixed lines, they faced mobile engagements. Hedgerows, villages, crossroads, forests. Small groups of soldiers were ordered to delay, disrupt, and withdraw, often with little support. These conditions magnified the importance of the individual infantryman. German infantry doctrine at the time relied heavily on squad-level automatic fire. Light machine guns formed the backbone of German units. Rifles supported them. When German troops encountered sustained, heavy fire, their instinct was to identify and suppress the machine guns first. That was how battles were read. That was how resistance was measured. British doctrine, however, placed unusual emphasis elsewhere. From the lowest level of training, British infantry were drilled to fire quickly, accurately, and independently. Sections were expected to deliver disciplined volleys on command and rapid individual fire when necessary. This was not an improvisation of 1940. It was the product of decades of institutional memory shaped by colonial wars and the hard lessons of the First World War. Every British infantryman arriving in France carried the same expectation. When contact came, he would not wait for a machine gun to save him. He would create firepower himself. German intelligence officers did not fully grasp this distinction. On paper, a British platoon looked underarmed compared to a German one. Fewer automatic weapons, less visible firepower. In theoretical models, this translated into vulnerability. But combat does not unfold on paper. As German units advanced into Belgium and northern France, they began to encounter resistance that did not match their expectations. Fire came faster than anticipated. Positions held longer than projected. Attacks stalled not against fortified lines, but against small groups of infantry who seemed to possess far more weapons than reconnaissance had suggested. Reports filtered upward. Some were cautious. Others were blunt. German officers described being pinned down by what sounded like multiple machine guns, only to discover later that no such weapons were present. At the center of these reports was not a new tactic or a secret unit, but a familiar tool used in an unfamiliar way. And to understand why German commanders misread British strength so badly in those early battles, it becomes necessary to look not at the battlefield first, but at the rifle itself and the training culture that turned it into something more. The rifle carried by British infantrymen in 1940 did not look revolutionary. It was long, wooden, steel-framed, bolt-action. By appearance alone, it seemed little different from the rifles carried by millions of soldiers across Europe. But appearances masked a crucial difference. The British service rifle had been shaped by a philosophy that prioritized speed in the hands of the individual soldier. Its action was smooth, its bolt throw short, its magazine capacity larger than most contemporaries. Most importantly, it was paired with a training system that treated rapid rifle fire not as an emergency measure, but as a baseline skill. From the first days of training, British recruits were drilled relentlessly in marksmanship and speed. One exercise stood above all others, the Mad Minute. Soldiers were required to fire as many accurately aimed rounds as possible in 60 seconds as standard target. Passing scores were demanding. Exceeding them was encouraged. This was not theoretical training. It was enforced. Instructors timed hands, not just hits. Recruits learned to cycle the bolt without lifting the rifle from a shoulder, to reload using stripper clips without breaking rhythm, to maintain sight picture while working metal at speed. By the time a British infantryman reached France, his rifle was not a single-shot tool punctuated by pauses. It was a continuous system. Aim, fire, cycle, fire again. Repeated until muscle memory erased hesitation. German infantry training followed a different logic. The backbone of German small unit firepower was the machine gun. Riflemen existed to support it, protect it, feed it ammunition, and maneuver around it. The individual rifle was accurate and reliable, but it was not expected to dominate a firefight on its own. The standard German infantry rifle, the Karabiner 98K, was precise and powerful, but slower to operate. Its shorter magazine capacity and longer bolt throw made sustained rapid fire more difficult. This was not a flaw. It reflected doctrine. German soldiers were not trained to imitate machine gun fire with rifles. They were trained to enable actual machine guns to do that work. As a result, German tactical interpretation became sound-based as much as visual. The crack and rhythm of incoming fire mattered. A slow, measured cadence suggested scattered riflemen. A fast, overlapping pattern suggested automatic weapons. And automatic weapons suggested numbers. British rifle fire shattered this mental framework. A well-trained British section, often fewer than 10 men, could produce a volume of accurate fire that sounded like several times its actual size. Multiple rifles firing rapidly created overlapping cracks, irregular but relentless, filling gaps that German ears expected to hear as pauses. There was another factor. British units were taught to control their fire, not waste it. Even under pressure, men were trained to aim deliberately, not spray. The result was a deadly illusion. Intense sound combined with effective lethality. German soldiers were not just pinned, they were being hit. In mobile fighting during the retreat toward the Channel, British units were frequently ordered to delay German advances. These are not grand defensive lines. They were roadblocks, crossroads, hedgerows, small villages, often held for hours by platoons or less. German after-action reports from May and June 1940 repeatedly reference unexpectedly strong resistance at points where reconnaissance had indicated minimal forces. Officers described attacks slowing under heavy infantry fire, only to find upon later inspection that the defenders had already withdrawn and had never been present in company strength. This misunderstanding mattered. German commanders based decisions on perceived enemy strength. Believing a position was held by a company could delay an advance, prompt flanking maneuvers, or call for artillery support. All this bought time. Time for withdrawals. Time for regrouping. Time that the British Army desperately needed as the front collapsed around it. The rifle did not change the outcome of the campaign. France would still fall. The British Expeditionary Force would still retreat toward the sea. But at countless small points along that retreat, perception altered reality. And it was in these moments, men kneeling behind hedgerows, bolts flashing, hands bleeding from heat and metal, that the rifle stopped being just a weapon and became something more, a force multiplier that existed as much in the enemy's mind as on the battlefield. That illusion of numbers would soon shape individual encounters in ways neither side fully anticipated. For the British infantrymen, speed was not about aggression. It was about survival. By May 1940, many units of the British Expeditionary Force were fighting while retreating. Orders were short. Maps were outdated. Communications failed often. A platoon might be told to hold until contact, then delay and withdraw, with little clarity on what waited behind them. In these conditions, hesitation was deadly. Men fired because they had been trained to fire. Not wildly, not blindly, but continuously. Each rifleman understood that the sound of his weapon carried weight beyond the bullet itself. Every round that cracked across a field suggested presence. Every sustained volley implied support. Accounts from British soldiers during the retreat describe a strange dual awareness. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew help was not coming. Yet they also knew that as long as their rifles kept speaking, the enemy would hesitate. Hands blistered from hot bolts. Throats dried from shouted corrections and shouted warnings. The rhythm became everything. Load, aim, fire, cycle, fire again. The world narrowed to front sights and movement in the grass. Fear did not vanish. It was controlled. Training replaced panic with process. German infantry doctrine relied on reading the battlefield correctly. Fire density, direction, and tempo informed decisions within seconds. Commanders judged whether to push forward, flank, or pause based on what they believed lay ahead. British rifle fire distorted those judgments. When German units encountered sustained, accurate fire without visible machine gun positions, confusion followed. Soldiers went to ground expecting belt-fed weapons. NCOs searched for muzzle flashes that did not match the sound. Officers delayed movement until supporting weapons arrived. In several documented engagements, German units halted advances or diverted forces based on the belief that they faced a defended line rather than a delaying detachment. This bought British units critical minutes, and sometimes hours. In mobile warfare, time is territory. From the German soldier's perspective, the problem was not just volume. It was consistency. The fire did not surge and fade. It maintained pressure. That suggested organization, discipline, numbers. German veterans later recalled moments when they believed they were attacking entrenched positions, only to discover afterward that the resistance had melted away, leaving little behind but spent cartridges and disturbed earth. What they had faced was not mass, but mastery. And as these encounters multiplied, the gap between expectation and reality widened, setting the stage for moments when perception alone would shape the course of combat. The deception worked not because the rifle was advanced, but because it was optimized. The Lee-Enfield rifle was designed for rapid manipulation. Its rear-locking bolt required less movement. Its 10-round magazine allowed longer strings of fire before reloading. Stripper clips were fast and forgiving under stress. In practiced hands, the rifle blurred the line between bolt action and automatic. Not in mechanism, but in effect. German soldiers expected automatic fire to sound mechanical. Bursts, pauses, belt changes. British rifle fire did not follow that pattern. It was uneven, human, yet unbroken. That irregularity made it harder to categorize. It sounded like multiple weapons firing independently, not a single source. The illusion was auditory, not visual. And in battle, sound often arrives before understanding. Sustained fire changes behavior. German units, encountering what they believed to be superior numbers, reacted cautiously. Movement slowed. Men hugged the ground. Leaders hesitated to commit reserves without clarity. The battlefield became sticky, each step forward contested by uncertainty. For British riflemen, this psychological effect was unspoken but understood. Veterans later described moments when German advances simply stalled. The enemy did not retreat, but did not advance either. That pause was the window needed to disengage. Fear moved in both directions. British soldiers knew discovery meant annihilation. German soldiers feared walking into a killing zone they could not see. Perception filled the gap where intelligence failed. British junior leaders, corporals and sergeants, were trained to control fire even in chaos. They did not order faster shooting. They ordered steadier shooting. Targets were called. Arcs were assigned. Ammunition was conserved without breaking rhythm. This discipline reinforced the illusion. Fire did not spike and collapse. It held. German leaders, interpreting this as company-level coordination, delayed assaults or called for heavier support. In a war defined by speed, hesitation was costly. These small decisions, made by men who never met, began to ripple outward. And eventually, in certain encounters, those ripples converged into moments where German momentum broke entirely. One such moment would mark the turning point, when a misunderstanding reached its peak and the truth arrived only after the damage was done. Late May 1940, northern France. The retreat toward the Channel is no longer theoretical. It is happening in real time. British units are falling back along secondary roads, through villages that change hands more than once in a single day. Rear guards are ordered forward, then pulled back, then pushed forward again. The purpose is not victory. It is delay. At one such crossroads, a small British detachment takes position along a hedgerow overlooking open ground. There is no time to dig in properly. Fields of fire are estimated in seconds. Ammunition is counted. Withdrawal routes are marked in memory, not on maps. German infantry advance cautiously, probing for weakness. They expect resistance, but not much. Intelligence suggests the British are exhausted, disorganized, nearly broken. The first shots come from the hedgerow. Not a single crack. A pattern. Rifle fire snaps across the field in rapid succession. German scouts drop. The main body goes to ground. Officers signal for machine guns to move up, but the sound already suggests they are late. This does not feel like a skirmish. It feels like an engagement. British riflemen fire deliberately. Targets appear and disappear in the grass. Bolts cycle without pause. Magazines are topped off between volleys. The sound never fully stops. German commanders begin to reassess. A company, perhaps more, must be holding the position. The decision is made to deploy heavier weapons rather than risk a frontal push. Minutes pass, then more. Under this pressure, the British do not advance. They do not counterattack. They simply maintain fire precisely as trained. Their task is not to destroy the enemy, but to convince him that time will be costly. Eventually, orders filter down the British line. Prepare to disengage. Fire does not cease immediately. It tapers, shifts, moves slightly along the hedgerow. The illusion holds even as men begin to slip away one by one, crawling back through cover, rifles still speaking for those already gone. When German troops finally move forward, cautiously, methodically, they find spent brass by the hundreds, but few bodies. No machine guns, no company headquarters, no evidence of the force they believed had opposed them. Only silence. The realization comes too late. The delay has already done its work. And as this pattern repeats itself across the collapsing front, German commanders begin to recognize a troubling consistency, one that will force a reconsideration of what exactly British infantry represent in battle. By the final days of May, the pattern can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. German field reports describe repeated engagements where advances slow against strong infantry resistance, only for that resistance to evaporate before encirclement can be completed. Commanders note the same details again and again. Intense rifle fire, accurate, sustained, disciplined, followed by an absence of the forces that fire seemed to imply. At higher levels of command, these reports create friction. Operational plans rely on tempo. Armored columns push forward, assuming infantry will clear resistance quickly. When that resistance appears stronger than expected, armor pauses. Artillery is requested. Routes are reconsidered. Each pause fractures momentum. At the tactical level, German infantry begin to behave differently. Patrols advance more cautiously. Attacks are delayed until support arrives. Flanking movements widen. All of this consumes time. Time the British are trading for survival. In several cases, German units prepare assaults against what they believe are company-sized defenses, only to discover that the defenders withdrew minutes earlier, often under covering fire that never fully stopped until the last man disengaged. The battlefield offers no dramatic reveal, no confrontation, only the uncomfortable knowledge that decisions were made based on an illusion that worked. This is the turning point, not a single battle, but a realization. German commanders begin to understand that British infantry fire cannot be measured by weapon count alone. The sound of engagement has been lying to them, or more accurately, it has been used against them. By the time this understanding spreads, the British Expeditionary Force is already compressing toward the coast. Delays compound. Road congestion worsens. Bridges remain intact longer than expected. Pockets of resistance, far smaller than assumed, continue to influence movement far out of proportion to their size. The rifle has done its work, not by changing the strategic outcome, but by bending the tactical reality long enough to matter. As the last British units fall back toward evacuation points, the battlefield quiets behind them. German forces move forward into ground they expected to fight harder to gain, carrying with them a revised respect for the men who just slipped away. That respect will surface again in later campaigns, in later reports, but its first impact is felt here in the narrow margin between escape and destruction. And when the guns finally fall silent along the Channel coast, the consequences of those small delays begin to reveal themselves. By early June 1940, the retreat of the British Expeditionary Force reached its final stages along the French coastline. Evacuation points, such as Dunkirk, became the focus of desperate operations to save men, equipment, and morale. For commanders observing from the rear, the battlefield was littered with evidence of both disaster and subtle success. Units had fallen back under immense pressure, but countless small engagements, often involving only a handful of riflemen, had delayed German forces and protected critical lines of retreat. German reports from these skirmishes offer a striking insight. In several cases, German platoon and company commanders described encountering company strength opposition in fields and hedgerows where no more than a section or two of British infantry had been deployed. The Lee-Enfield rifle had effectively multiplied the perceived firepower of the British units. The sound, the rhythm, and the accuracy of trained riflemen created the impression of coordinated, entrenched forces, prompting tactical caution, flanking maneuvers, and in some cases, temporary halts to German advances. British soldiers themselves were acutely aware of this effect, even if they did not fully comprehend it in the moment. Many recounted the cracks in the air that seemed to slow the enemy, describing a surreal awareness that their training, muscle memory, aim, and bolt manipulation was having strategic consequences far beyond their numbers. While no official records claim that a rifle alone had stopped German units outright, the cumulative effect of these engagements delayed enemy movement, bought critical time for withdrawal, and preserved manpower that might otherwise have been lost. The contrast between German perception and reality also left a psychological imprint. Veterans of the Wehrmacht would later describe an almost ritualized caution when advancing under sustained rifle fire, noting that the sound of coordinated British shooting could induce hesitation disproportionate to the visible opposition. This acknowledgement reflects the subtle power of perception in combat, an individual soldier's skill amplified through training, repetition, and sound to seem like a force far larger than it truly was. These outcomes, while small in isolation, created a series of tactical victories amid a strategic retreat. The British Expeditionary Force was ultimately evacuated, leaving France to German occupation, but countless lives were spared thanks to these engagements. The Lee-Enfield, through both its design and the training that emphasized rapid, sustained fire, had become an instrument of tactical deception, an invisible multiplier that exploited enemy assumptions and reshaped battlefield behavior. The impact of these small but significant engagements extended beyond immediate battlefield results. German operational planning began to shift in response to reports of unexpectedly effective British rifle fire. While strategic objectives remained unchanged, the fall of France was inevitable. The Wehrmacht increasingly factored in the delays caused by determined infantry sections using their rifles to maximum effect. Artillery support was diverted, mechanized advances slowed, and commanders grew wary of committing troops without clear reconnaissance. The perception of strength created by a handful of riflemen had forced the German command to alter its tempo, a lesson that would linger in later campaigns. For the British, the aftermath reinforced confidence in their infantry doctrine. Officers documented the effectiveness of rapid fire, well-trained riflemen in delaying actions, even when heavily outnumbered. This emphasis on the individual soldier as a multiplier of firepower became a point of pride and a teaching tool for units throughout the army. Training manuals began to codify lessons from these retreats. The Mad Minute was no longer just a drill. It was a proven tactic. Soldiers who could maintain accuracy under pressure were now seen as capable of creating illusions of force that extended far beyond their numbers. Historically, the Lee-Enfield's reputation grew not just because of its technical specifications, but because of the practical effect it had on enemy behavior. In the months following the Dunkirk evacuation, German analysts repeatedly noted the difficulty in assessing British strength during firefights. The rifle, combined with rigorous training, had turned perception into a weapon. This subtle but decisive influence demonstrates how even simple technology, when paired with human skill, can have outsized consequences in combat. These engagements also shaped the psychology of warfare. German soldiers, once confident in their ability to judge and overpower opposition, learned to respect the unseen capabilities of a disciplined infantryman. British soldiers, conversely, internalized the value of precision, rhythm, and controlled fire, not as abstract drills, but as life-saving strategies. In this way, the war's lessons were not written in victories alone, but in the nuanced interplay between expectation, perception, and reality on the battlefield. By the time the British Expeditionary Force had completed its evacuation, the echoes of rifle fire had already left their mark. Though the campaign had been a strategic defeat, the tactical ingenuity born of training, discipline, and design had saved countless lives and demonstrated that even small units, wielding a single weapon with mastery, could shape the flow of battle far beyond their size. In the quiet that follows battle, the true power of the rifle becomes clear, not in the holes it tears through flesh, but in the fear and respect it commands. The Lee-Enfield rifle was simple, reliable, and unassuming, yet in skilled hands it reshaped the battlefield. A few men, disciplined and trained, could project the illusion of a company, bending enemy decisions with sound, rhythm, and relentless precision. This lesson extends beyond weapons. It is a testament to the interplay between human skill and perception in warfare. Technology alone does not decide outcomes. It is the people who wield it, the training that perfects it, and the psychological ripple it creates that magnify its effect. On countless fields of northern France, the rifle became more than a tool. It became a quiet arbiter of time, buying pauses, allowing retreats, and saving lives that might otherwise have been lost in chaos. History often focuses on grand maneuvers, tanks, and air power. Yet here, in these small hedgerows and muddy fields, we see the subtle genius of preparation and discipline. A single weapon, mastered to perfection, altered enemy behavior, and preserved the cohesion of an army facing overwhelming odds. In that interplay between perception and reality, the British riflemen demonstrated that war is as much fought in the mind as it is on the ground. The story of the rifle that fooled the Germans reminds us of a timeless truth. In conflict, it is not only firepower or numbers that dictate outcomes, but precision, training, and understanding the human element. One disciplined soldier, armed with the right tool and the right skill, can create consequences far beyond what the enemy expects. And in that quiet, unseen mastery, history finds its most profound moments.